This is Melody Medley again with Oyez Real Estate. We are here to talk about processing short sales. Today we're going to talk about the marketing period, basically from day 1 to day 7. This should be going on. In previous videos, we talked about how to list the property, how to get that price to list it, because you do need an offer to continue with the short sale. So the property's been listed, and within the next 7 days after it's been listed, if you have not received an offer, then you need to drop the price immediately. Again, the banks will normally, and I use normally loosely because each bank is different and it's case by case, but normally a bank will not review a short sale package without an offer. So it's imperative that you get an offer as soon as possible. And by doing that, you're pricing it reasonable to where people want to purchase that property. You don't want to wait for the highest and best. This is not traditional in any way, shape, or form. You need to get an offer to continue with the short sale. So don't wait for a higher offer, or even have, I know some agents will give a deadline that they have to submit an offer by. It is the opposite. Whatever offer you get first, roll with it because it will help you. One, it helps the short sale processing move forward, and two, it helps to prevent any foreclosure from being set. The bank always has to have a reason to want to stop a foreclosure or not to initiate the foreclosure, and an offer is going to be that reason. So let's talk about the purchase contracts. You get an offer in, you want to make sure that you review it and review every single page of this contract. You cannot have in the contract that the seller is bringing money. Remember, they're in a financial hardship. They don't have any money. They cannot bring money to closing. It is actually not approved by the lenders if the seller brings money to closing. The lender will not allow it. I wanted to say illegal, but I don't know if that's the correct term. But the lender will not allow the seller to bring money to closing. They're not paying their mortgage, so they're not going to be able to bring money to closing. If anybody is bringing money to closing, it's going to be the buyers. And if the seller has money, they need to be paying their mortgage. So that's how you're going to vet the contract, make sure the seller's not bringing any money to closing. You need to be receiving a proof of funds or pre-qualification letter for that contract. If the buyer is putting 20% down and financing the rest, then you need 2 forms of proof of funds. One for the cash portion and then one for the financing portion. If the buyer is an LLC or an entity, they need to provide the articles of incorporation and the signing members of that LLC. The lender will require those with a contract that is being purchased by an investor or an LLC. Contracts cannot be assigned. You cannot have on your contract buyer Bob and or assigns. The reason why is because at the end, once the offer is approved, you are going to be signing an affidavit stating that no one in the transaction is related. It is called an arm's length affidavit. And the banks will not allow a buyer or anyone in the transaction to be related to the seller. The bank does not want the sister buying it, giving it back to the seller who is in default just so they can default again. That is not allowed. And the only way that the lender can verify that no one in the transaction is related is through those articles and members of the LLC. So if you're putting and or assigns, the bank cannot verify who that and or assign is. So they do not allow it. The lender will not pay for seller costs, including buyer's assistance, so no seller concessions. The lender will not pay for a survey or a home warranty. The lender does not pay for any doc preps or courier fees. They just don't pay for that. Now, the lender will pay for the seller's title policy and the settlement fee, commission, and taxes. Those are the generic fees that the bank will pay. These are the ones that the bank will not pay. So when you're reviewing the contract, make sure that the seller's not being asked to pay for any of this, nor is their lender asking to be paid for anything. Just a little side note on this contract, if the buyer is representing themselves, the buyer will not receive commission. I disclose this in my MLS because I want everyone to be made aware of this. The bank doesn't want to pay the buyer when they're taking a loss on their mortgage. They're not going to pay somebody to buy their loss. In essence, that's what it is. Now, to be truthful, I've seen this happen every now and then, but again, it's not worth the risk. It's not worth submitting that offer when the buyer's representing themselves and then they don't get commission in the end and they want to know why. In Texas, if you're advertising that the buyer's going to get a certain percentage and they don't, the listing agent has to pay for that. So I'm not trying to get into trouble or prevent somebody from getting their commissions. So I disclose that up front, that the buyer, if they're representing themselves, you're not going to get commission. If they're okay with that, that's great. Let's move on. If not, find another buyer's agent to represent you so you can get that commission. You want to receive and hold any additional offers that you get. You have the first one. I always say it's good to have a plan B. Continue to have showings. Even if you have your first contract, continue to have showings and continue to take those backup offers. Now let those backup offers know that they are in backup position. Since we just started the short sale, we are 30 to 45 days before we even know if this current offer will be accepted or not. So let those backup offers know this is a very timely process. Maybe in due time the property will become available and at that point you will reach out to them. But it's always safe to have a plan B in case the buyer walks for whatever reason and you're going to have to submit an offer right away. Because again, you're trying to prevent any foreclosure from happening. If without an offer, the banks really don't have a reason to stop foreclosure activity. So you have the offer, now you have to make the HUD. You can get this from your title company, however you want to get it, you have to submit a HUD along with your purchase contract. When you're making this HUD, again, we're at the very beginning. We don't know all the fees. We don't know the taxes. We don't know the liens at this point. We just started, but we know we have to get this offer in so the bank can review it. So I suggest overestimate on everything. Overestimate on the taxes, on the HOAs, the seller incentive. At this point, you would want to put $5,000. Overestimate on everything because we're still so far away from being able to close or even know what the approved price is. It's going to take time for the bank to review all this and make a decision. So you want to make sure your fees are just over exaggerated. When you're faxing in your offer, you want to fax in the offer and all supporting documents. I like to put it in order so it's very easy for the bank to understand. Here's my purchase contract. Next is my HUD. Here's my proof of funds and or my pre-qualification letters and the LLC documents if applicable. And again, anything that you fax in, you want to make sure that there's a loan number on every page and you want to make sure everything is wet signed and you want to make sure that nothing is more than 30 days old when you are submitting it. Of course, once you submit this paperwork, you want to call. I always call the next day to say, hey, do you see a fax that has come in? It's not going to be uploaded right away. The bank's not going to be able to see what you have faxed in, but they can tell you, yes, looks like we did receive something. If you call the next day and ask them, hey, do you see a fax? And they say no, confirm the fax number and refax it in again. Again, you don't want to waste time. Always be proactive and call the banks and make sure that they have the documents that you've sent in. During this time, you're marketing, you found a buyer, you've submitted it to the bank, so you're following up with the lender as much as possible. I always suggest to log all emails and all phone calls. When you're calling the bank to say, hey, did you get my fax? Get that person's name. If they have an ID number, get their information because it's been proven a time or two when I've called, somebody's confirmed something, I call a few days later, they say they have no idea what I'm talking about. So if you can provide the name of the person that you spoke to and their ID number, it'll be a lot better for you because then they can actually go to that person who took the notes and they can confirm and put you right back on track. I actually was working with Wells Fargo, and if anybody knows me, they are my nemesis. I think they need to get their act together a little bit more. They make my job harder. I feel like we're all a team here. We should be helping each other out, but not when it comes to Wells Fargo. So I have a story about them. I was working a short sale. We were deep into it. I was actually almost about to get my approval letter, and this is 6 months worth of work that I've been hard working for. And I call one day and they say, oh, your short sale has been shut down. Those are the worst words that you can possibly hear from a bank. Your short sale has been shut down. I clenched up, I froze. I said, why? What is the reason why? They said, because we didn't receive the last document we requested. And of course, I blew up. I said, I have a fax transcript. I have an email from my negotiator confirming that she has it. This is ludicrous. I need to talk to a manager. I escalated the issue, and sure enough, I had to send them all my confirmations of the email from my negotiator and my fax confirmation, and they said, you're right, we'll put this right back into short sale. It was our fault. It was the first time Wells Fargo ever owned up to anything, but they made it right. If I did not have any of that information and I didn't save all my faxes and my emails, they would have never opened it. So it is so important to save everything that you're doing. I use a program where it time stamps my notes. So when I'm talking to the bank, I am taking notes and it records the time and the day that I spoke to that person. And I've used that before to fight banks when they say, oh, we never got this, or I don't know what you're talking about. Again, you're the babysitter. It's your responsibility to stay on top of the banks. You do want to call the banks at least twice a week. I call at least 3 times a week on mine. If you have the capability to call more, I highly encourage it. You want to be pushing the banks this whole entire time, throughout this whole process. Whether it's with the first lien, the second lien, you're pushing the banks every step of the way. I've talked to people who've worked at banks, and they say they have 120, 150 files that they have to go through every day. So if I'm an agent or I'm negotiating a short sale and I call once a week, every other week, that person at the bank is going to completely forget about me, and my file is going to go to the bottom. But if I'm calling every day, every other day, I'm staying on top of it, they're going to remember me, and they're going to say, okay, this chick knows what she's doing. We got to help her. It may even be that they don't want to talk to me anymore. They're tired of me calling, so they're going to get my file moved a lot faster. Either way, it's going to benefit you more to call every day. You also want to make sure that the bank's not requesting anything. This is where I see things fall through the cracks, that people aren't calling enough and the short sale shut down because they're not calling. So it's so important to call the banks every day and log everything that they are saying in your correspondence. If a foreclosure date is set during this time, you're calling, you're checking up, you're going through the financial review, they do happen to put on a foreclosure date, the person that you're talking to at that time, you need to make them write in their notes that I am requesting a postponement of this foreclosure, and make them write it. Now they're going to say, well, I can't guarantee anything. That's fine. I need you to write it down and confirm that I am requesting it. And they'll do it for you. You just have to ask them. And then I turn right around and I write a written request to the bank itself, and then I also send it to the foreclosure attorney. So I'm hitting the banks twice, one with my verbal request, 2 with my written request, and I'm also sending it to the foreclosure attorney saying that we're doing a short sale, please stop the foreclosure. And during this time, it depends on where you are in the short sale, you really have to stay on top of the banks to make sure that that foreclosure is being stopped. Again, they have to have a reason, so you really need an offer at this point if they're coming up with a foreclosure date. If there's a foreclosure date set, that's when you need to be calling every day. What do you need? How do we get this stopped? What do I do? Just staying on top of the banks as much as possible. Because again, they want to work with you. They don't want to have to go through the foreclosure process and spend all that money and all that it entails. You're doing their work for them, so they're going to want to help you stop that foreclosure. And then the last thing is, when you're talking to your point of contact, whether it's a processor or a negotiator, you want to strive to be buddy-buddy with them. You guys are a team. You're working on this together. I've even seen and heard that the people at the banks, they actually get incentives, bonuses, for closing on the short sales. So the incentive for us, of course, as an agent, I'm going to get paid commission from completing the short sale. So is that person on the other end of the bank. So together, you're working towards the same goal. I have a chart in my office that has lists of banks and the primary negotiators that I see or talk to regularly. I know their husband's names, their child's name, when their birthday is. I become a very friendly relationship with them because, again, they have so many files that they're dealing with. I want them to remember me. Remember me. If you have an issue, let's say you're calling the bank, you're doing everything that you can, you're calling at least twice a week, maybe 3 times a week, you're calling, the bank's not moving forward, you're referring back to the flow chart on the next steps on where this file should be going, and it's not working, you need to escalate immediately. Don't waste time, escalate. And by knowing the type of loan and who owns the note and who insures the note, this is where that comes into play, because you are going to reach out to the mortgage insurer, because the mortgage insurer is going to want to know that their servicer is not helping. The banks, they have to insure that loan. They have to insure the loss. So if the bank is dragging their feet, shutting it down, prolonging the short sale, that just means more late fees, more mortgage penalties. I mean, it's all adding up that this insurer is going to have to repay back the bank. So they want to know, and they jump in immediately. I go directly to HUD, to the VA, whoever insures my loan, I'm going directly to them saying, hey, this is what's going on. I've submitted my paperwork. They're dragging their feet. What do we do? The mortgage insurers will actually reach out to the lenders and shake them. And they sure enough, they'll call you right back. The actual lender will call you back and say, okay, we got it, now we can move forward. If it's not insured by a mortgage insurer, then you need to go to the note holder, find out who the investor is, who owns the note, and escalate with them. If it's a private investor, then I would go to the bank's management department. I would ask to speak to a supervisor. If the supervisor is not available, I will Google who is the CEO of Chase Short Sale Department. I do not waste time. I don't have time for my sellers. There's not enough time for anyone to be wasting their time. I've even reached out to a congressman. We had a city lien that was they were not willing to negotiate. So I reached out to the congressman, told them what the situation was, how the seller was upside down, they're facing foreclosure. Their lender, wasn't willing to pay this city lien because they're taking a huge loss. And the congressman actually reached out to the city and we got it lifted that way. So whatever you have to do to move the file forward, I highly encourage it. Just don't wait. If you hear the bank saying, oh, call back in 5 to 10 days, honor that. I say, okay, call back in 5 days. If nothing's happened then, I'm escalating the issue at that point. It's just too much is going on for you to wait for the bank to actually do something. If you waited on the bank, I'm sure nothing would ever get done. So again, you're the babysitter, you follow up, you do the escalations as much as possible. You also need to be communicating with the seller. Remember, they gave you their trust. You were helping them. I'm sure they had a lot of letters and flyers in their mailbox on, I'll buy your house or you can trust me. But ultimately, they went with you. So you need to prove yourself to them and keep them updated with the process. I like to update every other Friday because nothing just happens overnight. But I call them as much as they want me to, and they call me as much as they want to. I'll have a lot of sellers call me, say, hey, I got this letter in the mail. What does it mean? They'll read it to me, and I'll tell them what it means, and we'll go from there. But most sellers are very interactive and they want to know what's going on because they want this to be successful and they don't want a foreclosure date. You also need to be updating the buyer's agents, the contract that you got in. You need to be letting the buyer's agent know, hey, you're the first offer in. It's going to be at least 45, maybe 60 days before we even know if your offer will be accepted. Please make sure that you're relaying this information to your buyer. It's just good that everybody's on the same page. I always say knowledge is power, so there's no surprises. If they're the first offer in and it's 3 months down the road, you want to make sure the buyers know that and the buyer's agent understands that because that will prevent the buyer from walking. And then you have to scramble to find an offer. If everybody's on the same page, it should go a lot smoother. I've even had three-way calls with buyer's agent and buyers to explain the situation and the process to them so they understand. I just want everybody to be on the same page so we can all be successful together. All right, so we've got our purchase contract in. We're calling the bank, making sure they don't need anything else, that they have all the documents. This financial review process can take up to 45 days, give or take. But during this time, you're going to want to start negotiating the other liens. By day 10, you should already have your title commitment back and the tax certification with that title search. By knowing the different types of loan, which we discussed in the previous video, will also help you to negotiate these other liens. If there are liens on the title that you are unsure of, or maybe that I don't discuss, you need to get with your title company to see how they can help you lift those liens. So let's jump right in. So second mortgage liens. The first lien holder will actually pay out, they'll allocate money towards the second lien. So remember, you have to figure out what type of loan you're working with to begin with to figure out how much they will pay out to these other liens. So we're going to talk about second mortgage liens right now. If you have a conventional loan, the conventional loan will pay out 8% of the unpaid principal balance. So not the total amount owed, just the unpaid principal balance. Or they could pay $6,000 to $8,000 to the second lien. It's all case by case with conventional loans. There's not a set in stone exact amount on what they will pay. When you're calling and you're talking to the lender, you need to be asking these questions. Also, you need to be able to provide the second mortgage lien payoff to the first lien. They're going to have to verify what that unpaid principal balance is, and you should already have this. Remember I think it was one of the first videos we did, we talked about calling the lender and requesting a payoff. So by now you should already have that payoff and be able to start negotiating with them. Okay, that was conventional loans. Now let's talk about HUD-insured loans. For second mortgage liens, how you'll see a second mortgage lien with a HUD-insured loan is actually going to be labeled as a HUD partial claim. It won't be an actual second mortgage lien. It's very rare. I don't even think I've seen an actual second mortgage lien with a HUD-insured loan. The reason why a HUD partial claim gets put on to the title or to the property is because the sellers did a loan modification. In a loan modification, HUD agrees to pay back the back pay. So if they're delinquent, let's just say $5,000, HUD will say, I will pay $5,000 to your lender to catch you up on your mortgage. But in return, we're going to put a lien against the property. So that's where the HUD partial claim comes from in terms of second mortgage liens. Now, these HUD partial claims do not gain any interest or any penalties. Whatever is recorded is what it will always be. So if it's $5,010.04, that's what it's going to be 10 years from now. These HUD partial claims have to be paid in full. And the first lien holders know that. They understand that it's going to be paid in full. There's no ifs, ands, or whats about it. Nobody's going to fight you on that. But you do need to reach out to HUD, which their servicer is NOVAD. So you want to reach out to NOVAD and get the payoff for this second lien. It's rare to have a second mortgage lien with any VA, HELOCs, reverse mortgages, or USDAs. Specifically with like HELOCs, or not HELOCs, but VA and USDA. I mean, it's 100% financing, so they don't need to get a second mortgage lien. HELOC and reverse mortgages are about taking the equity out of their house, so therefore they wouldn't be getting a second mortgage. They would just be refinancing, in essence, their first lien. For all of these second mortgage liens, you have to get their approval letter. The HUD partial claim, you just get the payoff, you're good to go. With a conventional loan, during this time that you've initiated the short sale with the first lien, you're also doing it with the second lien. So you need to obtain their approval letter as well. All right, now let's talk about subordinate liens. Subordinate liens can be a variety of different things. The most one that I see is a city lien, that the city has done work to the house. A lot of the times it's because the property is vacant, so they had to board it up. Maybe they had to go and mow the yard. Maybe they had a pool and it was unsecured, so they made it secure. Whatever the case may be, the city does work and they have to be paid. You need to call the city and get a payoff, and this has to be paid in full. There are no exceptions. I've never seen a city negotiate on their price whatsoever. So just know that it has to be paid in full. Another lien that I've seen is called a housing rehabilitation mechanics lien or a home restoration loan. Basically means that the city will hire a contractor to bring the seller's property up to code. I've actually only seen this one time, but they're out there. You have to get a payoff, and these liens have to be paid in full. There's no negotiating with these liens. The third one that's pretty common is what's called the mechanics lien. It's unpaid work done by a contractor or a person who has done work to the house. I've seen it with like a water softener system, maybe a roofing company. They did work and they were never paid. Again, you'll need to get a payoff from them. These can be negotiated. They can be a little bit more tough, especially if it's an actual person who put a lien against the property. You know, if you own your own company, you did this work, you want to get paid for it. But I always say, you know, just work with them, talk to them, let them know the situation. Hey, the seller's in this horrible situation. That's probably why he wasn't able to pay you to begin with, or, you know, afterwards. Let them know that the bank is taking a loss. In a short sale, everyone's taking a loss. So it's not beneficial for these subordinate liens to keep fighting you, because ultimately, if the property forecloses, they're going to get wiped out and get nothing. So these subordinate liens will tend to work with you. So for a mechanics lien, if you do have one, get the payoff. They can be negotiated. Conventional loans, again, they're only going to pay $6,000 to $8,000. It's case by case. And then HUD, is only going to pay $1,500 to the subordinate liens or up to $4,500. So remember that with HUD insured loans, the sellers can get $3,000 relocation money. They may have to forfeit that money, so the subordinate lien can actually get $4,500. The bank's already going to pay $1,500, and if the seller forfeits their incentive money, that's a total of $4,500. This is when I would negotiate with the company or the person who put the lien on the property, and I would start negotiating off very, very low. Start at $1,000. Give yourself some wiggle room to come up and let them come up. That way everybody feels like they're negotiating and they're compromising, and it will also help the seller keep some of their incentive money. The seller doesn't necessarily have to give all of the $3,000 if they want to give $500, $1,000, whatever the case may be. But again, without a clear title, you cannot go to closing. So you really have to negotiate these liens to benefit all parties. There's one other subordinate lien. It's called a down payment assistance program. It's a non-repayable grant for down payment and closing assistance. Sometimes you'll see this with new home buyers. Sometimes you'll see it with cities who are promoting a new part of the city that they're building up. These requirements you're going to have to read, you're going to have to get. You can go into the county, it's all public record, or you can call the city itself, the down payment program company, and call them and find out what the requirements are to get this lifted. Since it's a non-repayable grant, you would think that it could be lifted, but they have to meet certain requirements. The ones that I've seen is that they have to occupy and live in the property for at least 10 years before that lien can be lifted or released. Now, there's probably different programs out there, so you're just going to have to figure out what those requirements are. If the requirements have not been met, then you need to go to the down payment assistance program company and talk to them and figure out how much they're willing to take versus how much you know that the bank is going to give them. If it's a conventional, you're looking at around $6,000 to $8,000. If it's a HUD insured loan, they're only looking to get $1,500 to $4,500 max. So work with them to figure out what's the best compromise for everybody in this situation. Again, you will have to get those releases from the down payment assistance program. Hopefully the requirements have already been met and they'll just email you the release. That would be the best case scenario. If the requirements have not been met, then you will need to work with them and get that actual release. Homeowners Association is probably the most frequent lien that I see out there. It's probably on all of my properties that I see. It could be past dues, or the HOA could actually be putting a lien on the property. Either way, they have to be paid. So what you want to do is you want to get the payoff from the HOA. They can be negotiated. I start my negotiations off low. If I know that I have a conventional loan, they're going to be willing to pay maybe $6,000. But I also want to get my seller some incentive money, so you kind of have to weigh it out and see what's best for everybody. You should call the HOA. Even ask for an email, let them know that you're doing a short sale for these sellers and that you want them to consider a shorter payoff as well. With the HOA, I approach it in a couple different ways. If the HOA people seem really nice and I tell them what's going on, like, hey, I'm only able to get you $1,000 on the $4,000 that's owed, they're going to tell me, okay, no problem, just send me an email, we'll send you the release. That's best case scenario. Worst case scenario is that the seller maybe knew somebody on the HOA board and really made them upset. And so now the HOA is just coming really hard at this seller saying, I am not taking a loss. There's no way. This guy had multiple chances to repay me, repay the HOA, whatever the case may be. You have to be able to negotiate the HOA release. So with conventional loans, they should actually pay the HOA in full. Reverse mortgage, HELOC, VA, USDA, those should all pay the HOA in full. You still need to get the payoff and you need to put it on your HUD. You're going to have to provide that HOA payoff to the bank because they're going to have to see, what am I paying, what is this for, and that's shown through the payoff. The only time that I've ever had an issue with HOAs is with FHA loans or HUD insured loans because they can only pay up to $4,500. And then the last thing, is that, again, if the HOA is not willing to agree to accept a shorter payoff, then the only option they have is that the property is going to go to foreclosure and they're going to get wiped out and get nothing. It's a tug of war game with HOAs. Just start off low and just work your way up. By knowing the type of loan you have and what they're able to pay out will help you in your negotiations. And once more, make sure that you get a written agreement. If the HOA verbally says, yes, we'll take it, you have to say, hey, can you shoot me an email just saying that? And they can type it. It could be a 3-word sentence. Yes, we agree to accept $1,000. That's great. Just something in writing to show that they are agreeing to accept the payment. And lastly, what I run into is tax liens. So the first one is a property tax lien, meaning that there's unpaid property taxes. The seller probably didn't have their taxes in their escrow account with their mortgage payments, so they were required to pay the taxes on their own, and they didn't. So what the sellers do is get a tax company to actually pay the taxes. But in return, that tax company says, well, I'm going to put a lien against the property. So for those instances, you have to get a payoff and they have to be paid in full. No matter what type of loan you have, they will be paid in full. All taxes will always be paid in full. Property taxes will be paid in full. You just need to get the payoff. You may even have to get a couple different payoffs. They tack on late fees and penalties, so if you're not closing for another 6 months, you need to remember to keep getting updated payoff statements so you can stay on top of it. And then the last one is rare, but it does happen. It's an IRS lien. This is for unpaid income taxes. The sellers did not pay their income taxes. This is a little bit more work for the person processing the short sale, but it can be done. It's lifted through what's called a certificate of discharge. And you have to have the approval letter from the short lender before you can even begin to lift this IRS lien. So that means that you're 4 to 6 months into the short sale, you've got approved offer, you have your approval letter, now you can begin to actually lift this IRS lien. You need to hand mail this application package, and I'm going to show you the forms that you need for that, but you need to hand mail it. If you fax it, they're not going to get all of it, or your fax is going to be too big. I don't know what happens over there, but every time I fax it, I get a call saying your fax failed. So it's better safe than sorry. Just go ahead and mail it. And then you need to follow up with them. You'll be assigned somebody at the IRS and their Treasury Department who specifically does their certificate of discharges. And you need to work with them and make sure that you are getting that certificate of discharge. And that means that that lien has been lifted, so now you can go to closing successfully. When I do these IRS lien lifts, my approval letter always expires. So I have to go back to the short lender and say, I need an extension on my approval letter so we can get this title clear. So it's a lot of making sure of the dates and the times and just following up and making sure everybody has everything. So with this IRS lien lift, these are the documents that you'll need for them. You're going to need a copy of the short sale approval letter. Provide a copy of the total amount owed on the mortgage, so that's going to be a mortgage statement. You're going to need a county recorded copy of the deed. This is public record. You can go to the county and find it yourself. And then you're going to need a copy of the written appraisal or certified appraisal and 2 market value opinions. So basically you either need an appraisal or a BPO report. Through the short sale process, the bank is actually going to order these, so you can request a copy from them to be able to have this. And then there are some forms. One's called the 12810. It's basically the authorization, so you can speak to the IRS, and then it's going to have you fill out another form to request the certificate of discharge. So you just really need to follow up with the IRS if this is what you need to do to get your lien lifted, but it can be lifted. Just tax on a little bit of extra time, and you may even be working with the same person at the IRS. I've seen that happen. I think probably just one person specializes in this type of lien release. So that is kind of negotiating titles in a nutshell. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.